I would like to begin by acknowledging that Blue Metropolis, a partner of Concordia University, is located on unceded indigenous lands. The Ganyange Haga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Jojake, Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. I know it by heart, but I'm a little bit nervous. Today, it is home to diverse population of indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. And on that note, it is my absolute pleasure, delight, and honor to welcome you to this 10th edition of the Premio Metropolis Azul. The Premio Metropolis Azul is given to an author from any country or region for a work of any literary genre written in Spanish, English, or French, which explores some aspect of Spanish language culture or history. It is sponsored by GINNY with the aim of continuing the presence of the Spanish language at Blue Metropolis. And again, as I mentioned, as we're about to award and celebrate the 10th edition of this festival, of this prize, I would like to invite my colleague and Premio Azul Institute founder and advisor, Gregory McCormick, to join me on stage to say a few words about Juan Gabriel Vásquez.
Good evening, everyone. So first, I just want to start by saying I'm very happy and very proud that we've managed to survive 10 years of this prize, given all that's been happening in the world, and to thank Ingrid for shepherding the prize for the last several years so enthusiastically. Et bien sûr, je vous offre mes remerciements au Festival littéraire Metropolis Blue pour continuation de la prix pour 10 ans. There's nothing like this prize in Canada, and it still continues to surprise me after 10 years that there's still nothing like this prize on the Canadian landscape. And also, I would like to thank, of course, Jenny Stikman. Jenny came to my office about 10 years ago, and she sat down and she said, I got some money, and I want to help support Spanish language programming at the festival because I noticed you guys haven't been doing it, and so I want to give you some money. Now, this never happens in the festival world. I'm just telling you, this is so. We were all kind of like pinching ourselves for a while, making sure that we weren't all just having a dream. And Jenny has really been a champion of Latin American literature, Spanish language literature for a number of years. And congratulations to you, Jenny, for your continued support for this prize. Thank you. Thank you. Cela continue de me surprendre qu'après 10 ans, il n'y a encore rien d'autre prix comme ça au Canada. And you know, what's important for me to spell out is what is so unique about this festival and what it offers Canada and Quebec. First of all, it's multilingual in an officially bilingual country where most events are not bilingual and most prizes are not bilingual, and here we are, trilingual. I'm not going to try and speak Spanish tonight because you really don't want to hear it. It shines a light on the part of the world that is not this part of the world. It offers through its winners that there is an entire world of literature that's important and compelling, which isn't Canadian or American or British. And I won't get onto my soapbox about how insular Canadian literature can be, how closed to the rest of the world it often is, and as a result, it doesn't speak to people outside of Canada often. I'm just speaking in generalities, and I think this is one of the things that this prize is meant to kind of help mitigate, is making Canadian CanLit in particular more international and more internationally inspired. And of course, this prize offers Canadians work by such writers as Valeria Luiselli, Junot Diaz, Luis Alberto Urrea, Sergio Ramirez, Claudia Pinheiro, Laila Guerriero, Javier Cerques, Francisco Goldman, and as of tonight, our 2022 winner, Juan Gabriel Vásquez, who not coincidentally served on our very first jury. We're very happy that he's here tonight. Je me dispense de l'habituel verso de la biographie de livre qui est une pratique courante dans ces circonstances, et je dirais seulement ceci. In the select group of Latin American writers whose work continues to show the world, and yes, I mean the world, views of contemporary life in some of the most culturally rich, vibrant, and often politically troubled parts of the world. Juan Gabriel Vásquez shows us again and again why he is a select member of that really special group of writers. Translated into more than 28 languages, his work shows us the complex and beautiful history of Colombia in ways unlike any other writer of his generation. And I know writers don't and shouldn't write for prizes, but it's really a great honor personally for me just to be able to invite him to the stage to accept the 2022 prize for the Prix Azul. So I'm going to invite Juan Gabriel Vásquez, GINNY, and Ingrid to the stage now.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. It's an honor, thank you, Ingrid, thank you, Jenny, for coming by Gregory's office 10 years ago. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. It's also a pleasure to be here. It's an honor because of the list of names that Gregory has just mentioned, all these wonderful writers that I read and admire, and some of them are friends of me. And also the fact that I was, in fact, a member of the first jury that awarded this beautiful prize to Sergio Ramirez 10 years ago. So this feels like a loop, you know, closing. So I write in Spanish. Yo escribo en español. Mi tradición es la tradición latinoamericana. My tradition is Latin American tradition. My forefathers, the people that I consider my forefathers, are that wonderful generation of writers we call the Latin American boom. Names as Gabriel García Márquez, Mario Vargas Llosa, Julio Cortázar, Jorge Luis Borges before them. And if there's one lesson that these people taught us, my generation of Latin American writers, is to break boundaries of tradition, break boundaries of nationality. There's an essay Borges wrote in the 30s called The Argentinian Writer and Tradition, in which he contended that as Latin American writers, we were not obligated to write about our countries or write only in our language or write only in our tradition. He told us that we had a right to mix traditions. We had a right to any other language and any other culture and any other tradition. And this is why this prize is particularly important for me, because this is a metaphor of what my intellectual and creative life has been like. Je passe maintenant en français pour vous dire que je crois que Carlos Fuentes, par exemple, Carlos Fuentes, à qui on célébrait tout à l'heure, il n'aurait pas pu écrire ses livres sans la lecture de Hermann Broch, Austrian writer, or Cervantes, Spanish writer. Et García Márquez n'aurait pas pu écrire ses livres sans Faulkner et Hemingway et Camus. Et Mario Vargas Llosa n'aurait pas pu écrire ses livres sans Sartre et Flaubert et la littérature de chevalerie en Espagne. On appartient tous à ce que Fuentes appelait le territoire de la Manche, el territorio de la Mancha. La Mancha, el lugar de donde sale Don Quijote, por supuesto. C'est pour cela que ce prix est important pour moi. C'est pour cela que ce prix représente en quelque sorte la croisée des chemins qui est à l'intérieur de ma recherche personnelle comme écrivain et de mon idée de ce que sont les traditions. I would like to end by remembering that this is the same thing that I was saying before in another event. If you go and find my books, which are available at the bookstore in English and French, you will find that not a single of those words was chosen by me. So I would like to acknowledge that and say congratulations to my translators, into English, Anne MacLean, and into French, Isabelle Guignon. And say thank you. Thank you very much.
It's working? Yeah, perfect. So, Juan Gabriel, that brings me to my very first questions that has to do with translation. Juan Gabriel is a journalist and a translator and a writer as well. So let's start with languages, this being the world's first multilingual festival and also a prize in Spanish that we have here in Canada. Juan Gabriel, tell us your relationship with French and English and other languages, and also your work as a translator. Tell us a little bit about the translator, Juan Gabriel Vásquez.
Thank you. Well, the translator, Juan Gabriel Vásquez, began as a way of earning a living in a very difficult moment in Barcelona, while I was trying to write my novels while reaching the end of the month. And I was doing several works at the same time, journalism and reading books for publishers. And one of those jobs was translating books. Not all of them good, but often bad books give more money to translators than good books. At least they take less time for us to translate. And the magic of translation is that you learn as much translating bad literature. I often say that translation is the best school for writing, because obviously we learn to write by reading, and nobody reads as well as a translator. Translators are the perfect readers. They understand what they are doing, what they are reading, much better even than the author sometimes. So this is what I did for some years. I translated from the English, also from the French, and this is why now I'm so patient with my translators. When they come up, like Anne MacLean, with ridiculous lists of 200 questions, in which sometimes she finds mistakes in my books. And I don't like my books to have mistakes, and I hate her a little bit for finding them. And then I say thank you, and we move along, and she makes my books into great versions in English. So, so it's part of my understanding of my tradition. What I was saying is right. One of the great legacies of this generation that we call the Latin American boom was this right to disrespect national boundaries, to disrespect linguistic boundaries, and just try to mix traditions. With those mixtures, they renovated the novel in the world, and the Latin American boom is one of the great phenomena of 20th century literature.
And within this space of no frontiers and open and full of imagination, how do you situate Colombia, and what does it mean to you to be a Colombian writer?
Yeah. Yes. Well, I write in. Do you want water?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
I write in the literary language, or rather, I write with a toolbox that has previously belonged to writers such as Gabriel García Márquez, among many others. His name is important because if there's one advantage that I have over him, is that when I started writing, he had already written, which was not the case for him. This is important because he enlarged the possibilities of the novel for us who came later. He had to invent something that wasn't there when he started writing novels in the Colombian tradition. Colombia wasn't a country of novelists, it was a country of poets. When he began writing, that changed a little bit. And so my generation and the generations that came after, let's say 1967, when 100 Years of Solitude was published, we benefit from the existence of that great novel that changed language, in Spanish, changed the way Latin America is thought about by the rest of the world. And so this is important. Garcia Marquez is probably the most influential, or in any case, one of the most influential writers of the 20th century in any language. You can ask Mo Yan in China, or Salman Rushdie in India, or Toni Morrison in America, or I don't know, Ben Okri in Nigeria. And they will all, Patrick Chamoiseau in the Caribbean, and they will all acknowledge the importance of 100 Years of Solitude in their work. I don't know of any other book about which you can say exactly this. And it's a huge advantage and privilege to write in this tradition. For some writers, it might be a burden, not for me. I think I have inherited a better toolbox, a richer toolbox, because those wonderful novels belong in my tradition. And this is the tradition in which I try to write.
Thank you, Juan Gabriel. And within this tradition, I mean, I was thinking 10 years ago when Carlos Fuentes passed away, almost to the date, The Guardian asked me to do a list of the novels that I recommended, or the writers, and I recommended one of the people on the list was Juan Gabriel, who was already recognized by The Guardian as, and again, we're always seeking the recognition from the British, you know, or from the English language, but already 10 years ago, Juan Gabriel was considered one of the best writers in our generation. I think there's several you know, of us here, and I think everybody would agree. So Rafa introduced you like that today. And so that was 10 years ago. Where were you then 10 years ago, and where are you now, and what are the next 10 years for Juan Gabriel Vásquez?
Well, 10 years ago, when Carlos Fuentes died, 10 years ago, I started feeling like something rather was changing in my creative landscape, because I had grown up with these novelists. Fuentes, Garcia Marquez was still alive, and Vargas Llosa still is. It has always seemed fascinating to me that I consider them to be my personal classics. And for me to share the same physical space with them, I had been in Cartagena with Carlos. I meet Mario Vargas Llosa every now and then, and this for me is it's the same thing that a French writer of my generation would say if they could call up Victor Hugo or Flaubert and say, hey, can we grab a drink? Can you read my book? Will you read my book? So that was a great privilege. I had just published The Sound of Things Falling. It was published in 2011, which is probably the book that changed something important for me in terms of readership, in terms of translations maybe. I'm very grateful to that book. And I was starting to plan, and this is important, a return to Colombia after 16 years abroad. I arrived in Colombia in June of 2012, and in October, the peace negotiations were announced. The peace negotiations between my country's government and the Marxist guerrillas. Negotiations that were an attempt to end a 60-year-old war. So all this is just to say that I arrived at a very important time, and at a time in which I knew that as a novelist and a journalist, I would have certain responsibilities. I mean, there were certain things that I wouldn't be able to avoid, or that would engage me in ways that before had never happened to me. So it was a very interesting time. And after that, I spent all these years writing 2 novels, 2 long novels, very complicated, 1 short novel, and 1 book of stories, all of them trying to think about this strange country of mine, so violent, whose violence has this enormous talent to reinvent itself, to find new incarnations, to keep running around the same carousel like a rat, without being able to stop the cycles of violence that plague us, and trying to reflect on all this as a novelist and a journalist. So it has been a very interesting decade.
Thank you. I would like to invite the audience to keep thinking of questions in English, French, and Spanish so that you can ask Juan Gabriel after. I just have so many of my own. Once I'm done with a couple more, you guys keep. So now, fact and fiction. I mean, this the topic of the talk that you had today at noon. Tell us also how you've arrived, or like how does one inform the other? Your work as a journalist, as a novelist, a little bit. You mentioned it, but for the people that weren't there, if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I've discovered over time that writing a novel for me, a novel as a work of fiction, as a work of imagination, has several stages. Before the writing of the novel, there's a journalistic phase. So usually my novels...
Sorry, Juan Gabriel, if you could mention the fingir part also as well. That was really lovely for the audience.
Sorry. You like that?
Yeah, we really like that. I think they would, yeah.
So there's a journalistic phase because more often than not, my novels have begun with an encounter, somebody I meet, somebody whose story is interesting for me. So a German Jewish woman who escapes Nazism in 1938, arrives in Colombia, tells me her story. I read a novel about that. It's called The Informers. Or a novel called The Shape of the Ruins is about meeting a surgeon in Bogota who tells me that there are some things that he wants to show me that nobody else can show me. He invites me to his home and he opens a drawer and takes out a vertebra that belonged to Jorge Eliezer Gaitan, liberal leader killed in 1948, and a part of the skull that belonged to Rafael Uribe Uribe, liberal congressman killed in 1914. Two political murders that shaped Colombian life in the 20th century. And I have these bones in my hands. And so what I do is I interview these people. I interview the German lady, I interview the doctor, I find things about them, I carry out field trips almost to look at things and understand how, I don't know, the smell of the place. And these are journalistic strategies. And then the novel begins. Then I can use that as the basis to write fiction. Now, what I suggest in my last book, it's called in Spanish, Volver la vista atrás. It hasn't been translated into English. It will come out in the UK this fall and in the US and Canada in February. With another title called Retrospective. So it's the true story of a friend of mine who spent his adolescence in communist China. He became a Red Guard, and then he went back to Colombia to join the Maoist guerrillas. And it's a life of adventure, but also a very eloquent life in terms of discussing very important subjects that are dear to me. The way history and politics shape our private lives, the way we inherit ideas and emotions and missions in life from other generations that shape our destiny. All these things are there in my friend's story, but there's not one single line that has been made up in terms of events. Nothing that happens in the book is a product of my imagination. So what I suggest, and Ingrid liked, is that we should maybe enlarge the definition of fiction. To this end, I was helped by an old Colombian dictionary, a dictionary that was written by a grammarian, Rufino José Cuervo, at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century. It remained unfinished for him. It was finished after by philologists and grammarians in Colombia, and it's a beautiful work of knowledge, really. And in that dictionary, there's a definition of the verb in Spanish, fingir, which means to pretend. In French, feindre, c'est le verbe qu'on associe à la fiction. No? And it says, Fingir means to model, to shape something. It's a verb we use in the context, says the dictionary, of sculpture or wood carving. And I just fell in love with this idea, that this is what fiction is. Fiction is not only making things up from scratch, fiction is also taking a big piece of material of any kind, in my case, human experience, and give it shape, and take the sculpture out of the piece of mountain that is the experience of another human being. So this is also fiction. Fiction is trying to shape what is already there to arrive at new meanings or to extract new meanings from an already given piece of human experience. This is what I was trying to do.
I think you've done it quite well, and you continue to do it quite well. And may you continue to keep doing it quite well. On that note also, let's talk a little bit about the writer as a craft, as a profession, as a dream. You know, when did it begin? And also with Mariana, we were telling us that you run it like a company. I mean, it's the Juan Gabriel Vásquez enterprise, you know, because this is so fitting for the Premio Azul, because that is exactly what the Premio Azul rewards: writers that put the Spanish language or culture or history on the map, and you most certainly do. You know, in terms of you know, very, I don't know, I don't want to say ambassador, but even representative of our culture, or the way that, or what you write and who you are is kind of what we want to, the way that we want to be seen. So tell us a little bit about all of that, you know, and the brand, Juan Gabriel Vásquez, the writer, you know, like the craft, everything.
Yeah, well, I
leave my questions very open-ended, as you can see, you know.
If indeed I'm a product, then Mariana is a producer, and you know, any claims should be addressed to her. She will give you your money back if you don't like my books. Well, this is an early vocation. I started writing when I was 8, and there's a short story that I published in a little school yearbook when I was 8. And this is what I've always. This has always been my only way to be in the world. Books, reading books and learning how to write them. The thing is, in my generation and in my social context and in my country, it wasn't easy to say, I want to be a novelist. So at the beginning, I thought it wasn't possible. It wasn't a possibility. I started law studies because I come from a family of lawyers. And then in the middle of these studies, I realized that this literary thing that I thought was something to do in my spare time while I carried on more serious things to earn a living wasn't in fact a hobby or a pastime of any kind. It was a vocation. It demanded total dedication. And so I took some decisions to change my whole life strategy and try to put literature at the center of my life. The act of learning to write novels, learning to read and learning to write novels. And since then, this is what I have been doing. The beautiful thing about writing fiction is that you never really learn. You never fully learn. You're always learning. You're always discovering new ways to do things, which is obviously what any writer should try to do, something that has never been done before. And then the novels at some point started having conversations with people in other cultures, in languages very different, in traditions and cultures very different from mine. And it's a huge privilege and a huge satisfaction. The other day we received, Mariana and me, we received a book of mine that was coming from nobody knew where, and we spent the better part of an hour trying to figure out what language it was. And I think that's a beautiful thing. It ended up being Lithuanian. And the idea that an obsessively Colombian story that I write about my obsessions, my compulsions, my demons, trying to figure out what this strange country of mine is and how it works and how its history works, for it to be read in Lithuanian and maybe understood is just a miracle. And it's what literature does. It's this bridge that we have between us as cultures.
And speaking of cultures, my next question was about the fact that you've lived abroad and then came back to Colombia. So tell us a little bit about, on peut parler un peu en français parce que tu as vécu à Paris, à Belgique. Donc, racontez-nous de ton expérience internationale, comment ça a été, comment ça marche avec ton travail comme écrivain et tout ça.
Alors, je suis allé à Paris parce que c'était une tradition latino-américaine. Les écrivains latino-américains, j'ai découvert, apparemment, il fallait aller à Paris. C'était une sorte de rite de passage, suivant les pas de Cortázar, mais aussi, il y avait un poète du Nicaragua, Rubén Darío, qui est arrivé à Paris en 1900 pour se faire reconnaître comme poète. Apparemment, c'était à Paris qu'on donnait les cartes de poètes. Et alors, il est allé là et il a commencé à écrire des poèmes sur ce qu'il voyait, sur les boulevards, la vie des cafés. Et il y avait un écrivain très intelligent, très cultivé, Valéry Larbaud, qui lui a dit: non, monsieur, on ne veut pas que vous nous parliez de nos boulevards et nos cafés. On veut que vous soyez latino-américain, que vous parlez de la jungle, et de la forêt et de la pampa. Et je crois que c'était le premier cas d'une conversation très tendue qu'on a, les écrivains latino-américains, avec la culture européenne qui veut qu'on soit des latino-américains professionnels en quelque sorte. Et c'est une conversation tendue mais très intéressante parce que d'un autre côté, moi je crois au mystère de ce que je croyais connaître. Je n'écris pas sur l'Espagne où j'ai vécu 13 ans, ni sur la France où j'ai vécu 3-4 ans, un pays que je connais très bien, parce que je n'ai jamais cru que je comprenais sa culture, son histoire, tandis que j'ai cru à des moments différents dans ma vie que je comprenais mon pays, et c'est la découverte que ce n'était pas vrai. C'est la découverte que je ne le comprenais pas, que c'était un territoire mystérieux, plein de secrets. C'est ça qui me pousse à écrire. J'ai toujours cru que la raison pour laquelle Joyce écrit sur Dublin et Balzac écrit sur Paris et Vargas Llosa écrit sur Lima, ce n'est pas qu'ils connaissent ces endroits, c'est qu'ils croyaient les connaître, et ensuite il y a quelque chose qui révèle qu'il y a des monstres cachés n'importe où. Et c'est là qu'on commence à écrire, quand on comprend qu'en effet, on n'a pas la vérité sur ces endroits. Voilà.
Bueno, pasamos entonces al español un poquitito. Tus influencias, hoy mencionaste que Conrad, Heart of Darkness era una, bueno, es tu libro preferido, no influencia. Cuéntanos un poquito de la biblioteca de Juan Gabriel Vásquez, o sea, que lees lo que, bueno.
Sí. Bueno, la biblioteca está hecha primero del territorio de La Mancha. Somos todos hijos de Don Quijote. Y Don Quijote viene filtrado a través del boom latinoamericano, estos escritores de los que hablaba. Pero como decía antes, la lección de estos escritores es la mezcla de tradiciones. Tenemos autorización para buscar contaminación, en el mejor sentido de la palabra. Y por eso la prosa de Borges a veces suena como si escribiera en inglés, ¿no? Y mi biblioteca, que cambia constantemente, tiene algunos nombres que siempre están ahí. Conrad es uno de ellos. Proust et Camus son otros, Yourcenar, Virginia Woolf, y los rusos que solo puedo leer gracias a las traducciones al inglés de dos traductores excelentes, Richard Pevear y Larisa Volokonsky. Dostoyevsky, Tolstoy, Chekhov son para mí muy importantes. Esta es digamos, la pequeña constelación en la que me muevo, pero que constantemente se está ampliando, ¿no? Para enseñarme nuevas maneras de escribir mis novelas.
Thank you, Juan Gabriel. And speaking of the Russians, because Rosemary Sullivan is here, I'd like you, and again, because I was also among many other friends too. Festivals are also, the festival circuit is one that you're a part of. You're a regular in all the a headlining regular in all, the Guadalajara Book Fair and the Hay Festival, and where you met Rosemary. And I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit about your story, what you wrote, because I'm dying to know myself about, inspired by Svetlana Alliluyeva. If you could tell us.
Of course, you know that Rosemary wrote an extraordinary biography of Svetlana Alliluyeva. Is that the right pronunciation? Did I completely? Yeah, okay. Who was, of course, Stalin's daughter. I was invited to give a course in Bern, in Switzerland, in the winter and spring of 2017. I stayed in this house in the suburbs. In the top floor of this house in the suburbs, and the lady who owned the house one day invites me and my family for coffee, and she starts talking about her diplomat father. Her father was the Swiss ambassador to Brazil and Argentina at some point, and so she starts showing me old papers, and I'm in love with old papers. I love old documents that are like ghosts from vanished realities. And at some point she says, well, the one thing that I can show you is some document that I have from the time when Stalin's daughter slept in your room. And I say, what? It seems at some point during her escape, shall we say, from Russia. She fled Russia while being in the middle of a trip to India. She fled Russia. She eventually landed in Switzerland, where she was supposed to take a flight to the US and start her exile. She was, of course, pursued by the KGB, among other Russian agencies, and because of that, the Swiss put together a kind of improvised system in which they hid this woman from house to house with the aid of old diplomats or people in the know, or nuns at some point, I seem to remember. And so one of those places was the room where I was sleeping in Bern. If you don't write something about that, you're not a writer. And so I wrote a short story with the help of Rosemary's extraordinary biography and of Svetlana's books, 2 books I think she has, which talk about this period in detail. And that's it, yes. This is how fictions are born for me.
Thank you, Juan Gabriel. Rosemary, would you like to comment or say anything? No?
It's a great honor for you to tell me that you enjoyed my book. And yes, Svetlana was moving from hiding place to hiding place in Switzerland because the Americans were doubtful whether it was a good idea to bring her to the United States, because the Secretary of State was working on détente with the Russians, which fell apart in minutes anyway. Yeah, she was quite a character. So yeah, I would think the ghost of Svetlana would still be in that room.
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to now open the floor to questions from the audience. Los invito a que hagan preguntas. Sí, por favor, adelante.
First of all, congratulations on this prize.
Thank you.
Shame to admit, I really don't know your work, but starting from tonight, I am going to discover your work very fast. But I'm very curious because you seem to love language and you're a master of wordcraft. You're fluent in French, English, Spanish, and maybe Russian, I don't know.
No.
And yet you use translators for your own
Yes.
books.
Yes.
So may I ask, why is that?
Yes.
Excellent question.
Yeah. Well, I do write in English, but things different from fiction. Fiction, for some reason, I think fiction is connected to a deeper place in ourselves that has to do with childhood and maybe the cultural presence of words. We know one language better than any other. That's always the case. Even masters of writing in another language, like Vladimir Nabokov, used to acknowledge the fact that his Russian was much better from every point of view than his English. And this is what Spanish is for me. In Spanish, I have a knowledge of all the little tools in my toolbox that I don't have in English. And so I write reviews in English. I occasionally contribute something to the New York Times, or I just published a review in the New Yorker, and I enjoy this because I love the language. But fiction, I think I can only write in my mother tongue. Yeah, for very mysterious reasons. But fiction is a very mysterious thing.
I can understand that, actually.
Yes, yes. And that's why I need translators. And I'm very happy to need them and to work closely with my translators in the two languages that I can have a say in. And it's a fascinating process in which I learn things, and maybe, who knows, maybe one day I will learn so much that I will be able to write in English, to write a novel or a short story. Thank you.
Thank you. ¿Preguntas? Ahí atrás, sí. Marta, creo que es Marta, sí.
I want to know what is your relationship to your published work? Because, for example, Mexican poet José Emilio Pacheco, after his books have been published, if you found him, and you wanted him to sign something, he would scratch something and say, oh, because after it was published, I knew that I had to change this word or that. So up until I get the second edition, he would correct already on the printed book. And I find it fascinating to find out from writers who are as successful as you, because people think that because you can write, it's going to come easy. How many drafts do you go over? And once the book is published, do you ever go back and say, maybe I should have chosen this other word? Or do you go like Garcia Marquez, who was like, I don't even go there because then I would have to change everything?
Yeah. Yeah, Garcia Marquez used to tell how once in Europe he took a train to visit a friend, and he had 100 Years of Solitude as a present to that friend. But he arrived to the train station late, and so he didn't have time to buy the newspaper. He didn't have any books on him. The only reading he had for the train ride was his own book. And he started reading 100 Years of Solitude, and all of a sudden he started looking for his red pen and crossing words out and rewriting sentences. And then he thought, I will never read my books again. On the other hand, Alfonso Reyes, a great Mexican essayist, used to say, we publish so that we don't spend our whole lives rewriting drafts. I do agree the work is endless. There is no end to particularly prose fiction and particularly long novels. There's always something you can do to them. My big problem is that I do things to them. After my books are published, I flip through pages, I find something that can be bettered, I find mistakes. There's always there's always a mistake. There's always some sort of errata in the books one publishes. Doesn't matter that they have been through, they have passed in front of the eyes of several proofreaders and editors and agents and wives. There's always something that gets printed that shouldn't be there. And I like my books to be better in each edition than the edition before. So at least in Spanish I have that power. In Lithuanian I don't, sadly.
Other questions? Sí, aquí.
So you talked about this idea of enlarging the definition of fiction, which I find very interesting. And as someone who is a journalist, what does that mean for nonfiction?
Yes, yes.
Another excellent question. Thanks.
Yeah, this is very good. Well, in the last few years, I've been witnessing a sort of constellation of books that have been published in several places, which we call novels, which call themselves novels, but in which there's no fiction. These are non-fiction novels. I'm thinking of, if you haven't read these books, please find them as soon as possible. Anatomy of a Moment by Javier Cercas, and Limonov by Emmanuel Carrère. These are two books in which there's no fiction. But we call them novels. I'm not really sure why. Javier Cercas has a theory. He says that his book should be called a novel, despite the fact that it's non-fiction, because of the kind of questions it asks. So there are questions that journalism asks, and there are questions that novel asks, and they're different. So that's maybe an interpretation. I do think, on the other hand, that there is a kind of non-fiction that deserves a place up there with the great works of literature, and that there are gray areas, and that ultimately the definition is not really, if you make things up, then this is a novel, and if you tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, this is non-fiction. I don't think it works like that anymore. What do you do with a Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe, which wants to be a work of journalism, and the author tried to pass as a work of journalism. He wasn't successful. We learned that he had written it many years after the fact, right? But it always seems fascinating for me, Gregory, how the book with which novels in English begin, for many people, Robinson Crusoe, and the book with which novels in Spanish begin, which for me is a little book called Lazarillo de Tormes, published in 1554. Both are not so much fictions as apocrypha. They were both passed as real documents by their authors with full intent of misleading people. They were false documents in that sense. Both books were presented to the public as nonfiction. If you read the first edition of Robinson Crusoe, there's not a single place in the whole book where the words Daniel Defoe appear. It's made, Crusoe makes the reader believe that this book was written by Robinson Crusoe. So what does that mean? That our traditions as our novelistic traditions begin with an act of falsification. People trying to pass fictions as if they were non-fictions. I think this is something we should think about.
Are you ever tempted to just say, fuck it, it's going to call this non-fiction?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I have. Yes, and it's very dangerous.
Thank you. Gabriel.
Earlier you were talking about, you gave an example, Marlowe and the search for Into the Darkness, the Heart of
Yes.
Darkness, and as it goes forward and reaching the very horror and so on. We heard also Carmen Rodriguez talk about how she was trying to trace how the Pinochet's regime came into Chile. But to think about your search into the heart of, let us say, Colombia, where do you think the source of the violence comes from? How do you account for that?
Well, I've written almost 3,000 words asking myself that same question. Where does Colombian violence come from? I don't have a philosophical answer, but I have the kind of answers that literature can provide, which are very difficult to define because I think novels do carry knowledge. Novels carry answers to very important questions. The problem is that the shape of the novel is the only shape that answer can take. That is to say, we cannot synthesize what Crime and Punishment says in one sentence. The answer to the question Crime and Punishment formulates is Crime and Punishment. All its 600 pages. This is the way novels talk about things. With all the extension of their scenes and their characters and their discussions and their dialogues and their introspections. But they do carry answers. So a kind of answer to Colombian violence is contained in The Shape of the Ruins, my novel about two political murders and the investigations we have carried out as society and the way we have failed to reach a definitive answer with these investigations. And so all we are left with is stories. Stories teach us things about reality, but they teach in a different language that is not clear. It's not clear-cut. It's ambiguous. These are answers made out of uncertainties and doubts and gray areas. This is what fiction does. Fiction that arrives at a single clear answer about anything is lying. It doesn't work. It's an essay disguised as fiction. So I have arrived to certain conclusions, but I cannot explain them in a different way than what my novels are. So, yeah, yes. But I have tried to explore different areas of my country's violence. The Shape of the Ruins is about these political murders. The Sound of Things Falling is about growing up during the difficult years of terrorism, of the war carried out by the drug cartels against the states. My last book of stories explores several moments of different acts of violence, big and small, not only in Colombia. So all these are, you know, like a shark going around. It's trying to reach. Yes, exactly. Yeah, at the heart. Yes.
Claudio.
We have two questions. So, since you were talking about Javier Cercas, you know very well, and Javier Cercas, when talking about Soldiers of Salmon, on this very important novel, he mentioned that he explained the success of Soldiers of Salmon because he has this obsession with the Civil War. With there is an obsession in Spain at the time he was publishing the novel. There was a point of contact between his personal obsession and the collective obsession.
Yes.
So maybe my question is, what do you consider your literary obsessions in general, no? And if those obsessions you feel are in parallel with the collective obsession?
Yeah, yeah. You know, for a very long time, I have felt they don't coincide. My obsessions and those of my culture, and sometimes I have felt like an anachronism, really, in my moments, in my literary landscape. For many years, I thought, what is wrong with me? Nobody's doing what I'm doing. Nobody is interested in these things that I'm exploring. They had more to do with the previous generation, maybe. But I find kind of an anachronism in that sense. Either I no longer do or I no longer care. I'm not sure. But the obsessions remain the same. And they are basically the past, the presence of the past among us, the fact that, as Faulkner says in Intruder in the Dust, the past is not dead, it's not even past. It stays with us, it's a dimension of the present, and we should try to explore it. This mysterious quality the past has, that it is only reachable through stories, through storytelling, and that makes for very interesting contests between the different areas in our society that try to tell the story about the same past. I'm interested in all that. I'm interested in this place, this space, this crossroads, where public life and political life and history, what we call history, meets private lives and shape our private destinies. The way history can invade our bedrooms and very strongly influence and sometimes wreck the private lives of people. This has always interested me, and this is what I've tried to do in all my novels, I think, to shed some light on that clash, you know, between public lives and private lives. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I realized it was not that different of the question, but maybe I'm losing my voice. I'll frame it a little bit different, but you talked a little bit how there's certain expectations of Latin American writers in Europe. And I was wondering, what about the expectations of Colombian readers of a Colombian author that has been abroad, that has lived there, and then suddenly is talking about Colombian violence, and then you come back and you keep writing about Colombian violence. So I was wondering how, were people interested, and then also, did you care about that? But also a country where, like you said, violence just keeps repeating itself.
Yeah.
Is there an appetite to read about this violence and to try to investigate?
Very good, very good. I think there is. I think there is. I've always thought, I mean, these are difficult subjects, and of course you will always find a reader who will say, why don't you write about the nice things in Colombia, of which there are so many? Well, I don't think literature is made for that, for writing about the nice side of reality or the nice side of experience. Monterland, this French writer, used to say that happiness writes with white ink, meaning that you don't see it on the page. If you write about, you know, how good things are, it doesn't show. It's not literature. It's not there. We are novelists. Are birds of prey, or rather sopilotes, vultures. We're carrion. Yeah, we feed off the dark side of our reality, and this is important because I think this is, if we were to find a use to be made of literature. There's a wonderful essay by Virginia Woolf in which she talks about the many ways in which we as readers can use the work of writers. And I love that verb, because I do think that literature is useful. It serves a purpose. It can be used to explore and illuminate and understand reality much better. And so what I think regarding your question is that all societies in which there is conflicts produce literature. In societies in which something is about to dramatically change produce novels, because novels are a place in which we filter, as societies, we filter our frustrations, our uncertainties, our fears. All those things are filtered into the novels a society produces at any given time. So I think this is what what happens with my books. I hope it is what happens with my books, that my fellow Colombians read them and find at least something that they didn't know about their own country before. At least this is why I write, having this in mind.
We have time for one last question. Yes, in the back. Yeah.
I was reading RUIDO de las COSAS that CAER has this week, and the night that Ricardo Laverde is killed, he's just one of 16 people who were murdered in Bogotá that day. I live in Montreal, where we were scandalized if 16 people were killed in half a year.
Yeah.
And somewhere else, a little later, you say, el miedo es la enfermedad principal de los bogotanos. Now, you live in Bogotá, and I'm just wondering what is your feeling about the immediate future of Colombia with the elections that are coming up in 12 days, and with such a polarized country. Do you think that the establishment and the army would allow Petro to be elected?
You know, I would rather stay on the general diagnosis. It is a polarized country. It is profoundly divided, and it is a country that traditionally has been unable to be divided in a peaceful way. It's a country that tragically believes that there is such a thing as a good violence. When violence happens to your opponent or your enemy, then there's a mysterious psychological justification that the country has always had, you know, à portée de main. This is the reason for so many years of unrest. It's very easy for a certain mechanism of Colombian society to wake up in moments of tension and justify or turn a blind eye to violence when it serves each faction's purpose. And this is a problem. And this is, I mean, we went through a moment of optimism when the peace agreements were signed. They involved a ceasefire that the two parts agreed on. For a year, the figures of violence dropped down dramatically. I mean, the last year before the ceasefire, 2,300 people were killed because of the war, in the war. The next year, that figure dropped down to almost zero. And we saw these images, these pictures of the room in the military hospital where wounded soldiers were kept, and that room was empty. And it was such a wonderful sight. Many of us didn't really think that this would stay, but you know, the image was there. The room for wounded soldiers was empty. Today, because of many reasons, among them a certain kind of negligence on the Colombian government, violence is back. And the peace agreements haven't been implemented like they should, and so violence is back in taking different shapes and forms. And so, I don't know. I certainly hope that I don't know. I'm not an optimist. I've never had that privilege, but I feel that maybe there's a way that the country will understand a kind of tolerance and ability to discuss and to carry out difficult conversations about the many difficult issues that are part of our society without killing each other. And this is, I think, the great task the next president has on his hands. to reconcile, to allow or provide reconciliation, if you can speak that way. But I don't know if it's gonna be possible. I'm not optimistic. Let's say something else to end up on a different note.
Well, let's continue. May we at least have writers, you know? No, but it's it's true. I mean, as I was thinking, I'm myself from São Paulo, Brazil, and the idea, I mean, for me, it's very comfortable that it's 10 o'clock at night and I can take a cab with my friends very safely on Sherbrooke, you know, and not have to run red lights. And I mean, that's at every, you know, and yes, I miss my country like crazy, but not having that, like living in that state of fear, boy, can I understand that. That's why it first brought me to Montreal. I felt like I was in a prison of fear. You know, São Paulo is a very violent city as well, and yeah, so. But on that note, I mean, what can writers do, if anything? Let's end on that note. I mean, what can we keep on doing? I mean, with the task of the writer, what can we do?
Well, I think allow us a kind of understanding that it's not possible, that is not possible in any other way. I mean, there are many things that journalism can do better than fiction, and history can do better than fiction. But there are some things that fiction can do that can't be done in any other way. And some of them are, as Ford Madox Ford wrote in the 20s, I think, allow us to know the entire lives of other people. Human beings are a mystery. And I think we read fiction in part because in fiction we can know people like we can't in real life. We know Anna Karenina better than we know our parents. And this is something to enjoy. This is something that fiction affords, this full understanding of another human being. And this allows us to better read life, better interpret life. There's a page in Proust's À la recherche du temps perdu in which the narrator, Marcel, says that readers are really not, writers, I'm sorry, are really not creators. They're translators. They translate life. They translate something that is deep within themselves, an appreciation of life, an understanding of life, and they translate it so that we can appreciate it and learn from it. And I think there are immensely interesting things to be learned about the mystery of our fellow human beings in fiction. So, you know, let's go read novels.
And may there be many, many great books from you, you know, to come. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Felicidades.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Just a quick word also to thank Ginny STIKEMAN, who makes this possible. It's an honor and a privilege to continue administrating the prize. Thank you, Gregory, for the advice, and to the jury, who's, if we may say so ourselves, is comprised of the 4 top programmers in the Spanish language in the world. We're very proud to have that. I also would like to take this opportunity to invite you to come back for more Azul tomorrow with Marta Batis, who's here to launch her short story, her collection of short stories with House of Anansi, No Stars in the Sky, with Rosemary Sullivan saying a few words, Gina Beltran interviewing. It's going to be a great, lovely little morning. So please come celebrate on Mother's Day, a little hour to, you know, Marta's also in a sense the mother of all Latina Canadienses here, like as well. So it's very fitting that we'll be there to enjoy her debut in Canlit in a big publishing house with House of Anansi. So, you know, really looking forward to that. So on that note, everyone, buenas noches, bonsoir, and keep enjoying the festival. Merci.